Hello from Unity of Ukaipa. I'm Reverend Deanna, and my talk today is on the power of belonging. The power of belonging. Right now, from where I sit, we are in the middle of a conflict cycle, as put forth by Greg Braden, one of my favorite authors. I stumbled across this blog post of his from 2016 or 17. He said that the planet starts going through a cycle of conflict because the magnetic field gets smaller. And so this disrupts our own alignment with our own planet. And then we can end up feeling like a raw nerve. Now, if you want to find out more about this planetary cycle, you can just search for Greg Braden on Google. But see, the cycle started in 2014 and it is peaking right now, 2020. And as you look around, we've got so much going on. We just got a lot going on. The pandemic, this contentious election, racial injustice, other kinds of injustices. And I think we're feeling it. And you might find yourself right now just feeling like a raw nerve. But one thing that I'm seeing is that we are all of us, many of us, not all of us, but many of us, we are fragile like a bomb. Fragile like a bomb. Just ready to get mad. Right? Some people, it's like they want to be angry. Okay? And I know sometimes I feel that way. It's like I just want to be angry. This is why I want to talk about this power of belonging. When we are in a circle of belonging, we're in a sacred community. So I want to define sacred community because we're not accepted for who we are anywhere we go. And so we want to find ourselves in a sacred community where we can practice this and trust our environment. And so in sacred community, this is where somebody is accepted no matter where they are on their journey, and where you can authentically express yourself. And in sacred community, we trust that others in sacred community with us, by virtue of being in this community, they'll also practice these same principles: acceptance and mercy, right? Letting every person just be on their path. So all together we get to practice this art of sacred relationship. Now, all relationships are sacred. All relationships can be a teacher. All of our relationships show us if our actions are taking us away from our divine nature or aligning us more closely with our divine nature. Now, just because all relationships are sacred, it does not mean they're all reciprocated. Now, we could be in a relationship with somebody who does not accept us the way that we are. We could be in a relationship with someone and maybe we don't accept them for who they are. Right? So we're in a sacred relationship, but not just with each other. We're in a sacred relationship with the whole world. We're in a sacred relationship with our life, how we show up in this life. And also, of course, in sacred relationship with each other. And it is our interactions with each other and in our lives and in this world that teach us how to live from this heart of ours. This heart is where we live. And this heart is where our soul is talking to us from, right? So when we're living in our heart, we're living from the heart. Like our soul talking to us is like so easy to recognize. Our soul is speaking to us all the time. We're not always open to hearing our soul, though. Now, the South African activist Desmond Tutu, he said, Africans have a thing called Ubuntu. It means I am because we are. He goes on to say this: we believe that a person is a person through other persons, that my humanity is caught up, bound up, inextricably with yours. When I dehumanize you, I dehumanize myself. The solitary human being is a contradiction in terms. Therefore, you seek to work for the common good because your humanity comes into its own in community, in belonging. Now, one of the most popular stories about this concept is told through the eyes of an anthropologist who was staying in a small village in Africa. And one day he created this big gift basket that had a lot of goodies in it that the children didn't normally have access to. He told the kids that they were going to play a game, and he put this basket of goodies way out in this field. He told the kids they were going to have a race, and whoever could get to the basket first, they would win all the goodies. So the kids were excited, and he did the whole on your mark, set, go thing, and they all grabbed hands, right? On your mark, set, go. They all grabbed hands, and then they ran to the basket. Children of all ages, the babies, the toddlers, the older kids, they all ran together. And so they all got the basket, they all shared the goodies. And he asked them about this. It's like, why didn't the fastest of you just run out here and get the basket? You'd have all this to yourself. One of the kids said, how can one of us be happy if all the other ones are sad? How can one of us be happy if all the other ones are sad? The hunger to belong, the hunger to care for each other is at the heart of our nature. We may be taught to be competitive, but it's not in our nature. We tend to turn toward competition because we're afraid of feeling ashamed, right? We've got to be the fastest, got to be the smartest, got to be the whateverest, or else we'll feel bad about ourselves. So we got to beat everybody else. We got to show how we're better than everybody, so we can feel a little bit good about ourselves. But see, being in competition, it's not a lasting feeling. Feeling good about ourselves never lasts. Being in belonging, in a circle of belonging, is what helps us to access that wholeness. We need to belong in a community, in cooperation, not competition, because the shelter of belonging calms us. It is where we can feel wholeness. It calms our nervous system. It boosts our immune system. And there is a force within us that is driving this need to belong. And that force, this divine longing, is coming from our soul. Our soul. John O'Donohue, an Irish mystic, poet, and priest, in one of his books, Eternal Echoes, he says the deepest nature of the soul is relationship. Consequently, it is your soul that longs to belong. It is also your soul that makes all belonging possible. So that's the deepest nature of our soul, is relationship. In all of these sacred relationships, we are learning to see God in each other, and we are learning to see ourselves in others. I think this is why Jesus said his most important commandment was, love God with all your heart, soul, power, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we've loved things before with all of our heart and all of our soul, but also loving with all of our mind and all of our power. This is about learning to master our thoughts. It's easy to love people with all of our heart and soul if they're likable already, if they mean something to us, if they're sweet and kind and giving and merciful. No, where we have to use all of our power and mind is in seeing God in all people, even those people we don't like so well, right? To see God in all things, we have to be able to choose to see God instead of the condition or the appearance. So if there's somebody that you don't like very well and they do these terrible things, the power, all of our power, all of our mind is to see beyond those terrible things, just to the spark of divinity that is within them. To remember that they too are an emanation of God, a physical expression of God walking around on this planet. But see, there are a lot of things that get in the way of that. We have to see beyond hurt, betrayal, events, conditions, pain, suffering. To love our neighbor as ourself, we have to also remember that our neighbor is an expression of God. every bit as much as we are an expression of God. Now, if we're judging our neighbor, judging, criticizing, blaming, condemning, hating, we're not remembering any of this. We're not remembering our own divine nature. We're not remembering that they too are an emanation of the divine. When we are loving our neighbor, we are loving God. And we're in communion with the God force. So that's why all relationships are sacred. All relationships teach us to see God in this world in all of its terrible disguises. And when we can see God within all of that, it's easy to see God within ourselves. Now, these most challenging relationships, they help us up level. If there's someone in your life right now that you just cannot stand, and maybe it's a candidate running for president, maybe you just cannot stand them. So if you use all of your heart, soul, mind, and power to see God within them anyway, you're up leveling what you're capable of. You're up leveling the greater degree to which you can align with the God within. Now, knowing a terrible person and loving somebody who's done terrible things, it's not about letting them be in your life. It's not about, oh, well, I have to love them, so I'll invite them in. You don't have to invite them to dinner. You don't have to ever see them again. You may have to call the police on them. You may have to file a restraining order against them. Loving them does not mean letting them in your life. This is all about you, not them. You're remembering who and what they really are. That's what you are remembering. That way you're not getting stuck in the blame and the hatred. Blame and hatred, they are not worthy of the light that you carry. They're not worthy of the light that you are. Blame and hatred will keep you from experiencing the love, the compassion, the curiosity, the resourcefulness, the creativity, the being solutions oriented. Blame, rage, hate, that keeps you from fully aligning with the God force within you. Now, every relationship is sacred. And when we can accept every person as a spark of the divinity, no matter their behavior, that's when we're seeing as God sees. And we can love as God loves. And we are loving God. We are loving God in that person. Love God with all your heart, soul, power, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Our most challenging relationships show us where we most need to master our thoughts. It's all about us. Mastering our own thoughts. And this is the power of being in a sacred community, is we get to practice this with each other, trusting that that other person is going to help us through, right? That's what we're here for. We help each other. See, each one of us, every single one of us came into this life with a little unwelcome guest, took up residence in our mind. I like to just say that it's sitting right here on our shoulder. It's our little me. Now, in different psychological, psychiatric, spiritual, religious, personal growth traditions, it's called all kinds of different things. The saboteur, the isolator, the ego. In the Bible, it's the adversary that Jesus battled in the desert for 40 days or wrestled with in the wilderness. But here in Unity, we call it the little me. Because there's the little me, and then there's the great me. And the great me is that loving, compassionate, resourceful, curious part of us, the part of us that is aligned within our Christ consciousness, that sees as God sees, loves as God loves. The great me recognizes that all is God in expression and loves all as God, loves God in all things. The little me, this little guy here, little me also participates in our life and in our personal growth and expansion by continually trying to convince us we are not who we are. It wants us to focus on limitations and conditions, walk by sight, not by faith, and blame something outside of ourselves for all the wrong going on in our lives. Blame other people. Blame the government. Blame the pandemic. That's what this little guy, this little me is doing constantly. Jesus wrestled with his adversary for 40 days. His adversary kept trying to convince him not to trust God. His adversary wanted him to lack faith, right? To lose faith in God. That's why it said things like, well, why don't you just go back to town and jump off a building and let God catch you? Show everybody there. What, don't you think God will catch you if you jump off a building? So Jesus had to wrestle that for 40 days, but he came out. He came out of that wilderness transformed. He came out of that wilderness bringing a big light to the game. Now, if we didn't have this guy to wrestle, if we were just totally aware souls on this planet right now, it would just be like, hey, how's it going? Well, I'm part of the all. It's all good. Okay, what you gonna do? I'm gonna go be an ocean. I'm gonna be a star. I don't know. Who knows what we were doing? So our little me wants us to walk by sight. And it wants us to move us away from that creative being that we came here to be. It wants us to focus on conditions, wants us to experience doubt, right? It wants us to keep thinking, oh, these conditions out here need to change so I can be happy. The pandemic needs to go away and things need to go back to how they were so then I can be happy. The person I'm voting for has to win so I can be happy, right? We're not in our centered self. We're not in our Christ consciousness when we need stuff out there to change. When we're in our Christ consciousness, we recognize all change happens in here. It's all in there. Right there. Now, when we are being guided by our little me, listening to our little me, full of doubt, full of blame, full of rage, full of regret, we lose our kindness. We lose our flexibility. We become prone to fear and negativity. But in a sacred community, we hold the light for others when they forget. Yeah. If we are not in a sacred community, because our longing to belong is so strong, we might join special interest groups and think we're part of a community. But see, most special interest groups are bonding over a shared hatred or criticism or resentment. They're bonding over a problem, not a solution. They foster this us versus them, okay, mentality. It becomes competition. It's not cooperation. It's us versus them, right? Us versus them. Now, if we are not being held in the loving arms of that community, I should say we're not being held in the loving arms of that community, we'll know that if we change our mind about what we believe. If we stop agreeing with them, they'll give us the boot. You can't belong to a Democratic club and change to Republican and still get to be part of that club. They're going to give you the boot, right? You can't be part of a Republican club and turn into a Democrat, right? They're going to give you the boot. If you change your view, an us versus them club will shun you because now you've become a them. This is not being held in a circle of belonging. It's not an authentic community, right? It's not a sacred community where you're free to grow and be yourself. Now, we are wired for belonging. We are wired for connection. It is at the heart of our nature. So what would lead to our lack of belonging somewhere? What would lead to that? And I really think it comes down to a lack of faith, that we get stuck in conditions and we need the conditions to change. And so we really need the condition to change. So now we're not trusting what works through us, for us, as us. If we can't trust that, we can't trust anything. We can't trust anything outside of ourselves. So this is where I like to say we go back to the unity principles. The first principle is God is all things. Everything that's ever been, everything that's yet to be, every idea that brings along with it zeal and enthusiasm to be created, and then the activity that we take to bring it into our lives, every person, everything Everything is an expression of God in this world. Everything that's ever been, everything yet to be. It's also within all of the scary things too, right? It's everywhere. There's not one thing that could be here that's not from God. Now, some things are created by people who are not in their centered self and they're making choices that do not honor their divine nature. So they may create harmful conditions. But underneath that is still the substance that made the kindest soul. Underneath it is still that substance of God. Underneath all of it, it's still there. Now, we don't have to like the things that are happening. But if we recognize that God's present in there somewhere, that's all we have to do. Just remember, there's a divine spark within all things and everywhere. This means that good could still come out of something, right? Look at all the good that we found came out of the pandemic. There's been a lot of new ways of doing things. Like most of us would still wish the pandemic never happened, but there's still solution. There's still the God force working within all that, right? It's still there. So this is what the whole hero's journey is basically based on. Is in the hero's journey, we start off thinking we're less than we are, and we go through the journey and we find out we are so much more than what we ever imagined. Now, if you think about famous heroes that went on the hero's journey, Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, Harry Potter, they all discovered what they were capable of doing in a circle of belonging. Right? Luke Skywalker had Han Solo and Princess Leia. Frodo Baggins had Samwise Gamgee. Harry Potter had Hermione and Ron, and his circle of belonging really expanded out into the school. But you know what else? This world and this life and all of these conditions that we're experiencing right now, that we maybe want to call our villains, right? The things in our life we don't like, maybe they're our villains. When we understand their sacred relationship to us, they up-level us, right? And our circle of belonging helps us to overcome the villain, right? So Luke Skywalker had Darth Vader in his life, but his circle of belonging helped him overcome Darth Vader. Frodo Baggins, I didn't really see Frodo Baggins as having a physical enemy other than the ring. And it was more a condition that Frodo had to overcome. He had an addiction to that ring, even though it was taking over him. It would have killed him eventually. So Frodo had to overcome the ring, the condition of the ring, but he only could do that with Sam's help. Harry Potter had to fight Voldemort, but he got to that point because of his circle of belonging supporting him. So our circle of belonging helps us to overcome those challenges. Now, within these sacred relationships, we're learning to call forth courage. That's what we're doing. We're learning to call forth courage, and our community helps us do that. That way we're not letting fear control us. I think this is what Paul meant when he said in Romans 14:7, none of us lives to himself alone. None of us are here just to serve ourselves. In one moment, we may feel like Frodo Baggins, but then we're also somebody's Samwise. In one moment, we may feel like Harry Potter, but then in another, we're another person's Hermione. Okay, maybe we're Luke Skywalker, but then now maybe we're Han Solo, or maybe we're Voldemort, or Darth Vader, right? I mean, who knows? But we are here to be in relationships with others. Remember, how can one of us be happy if all the other ones are sad? So we start here, and we start in an actual community, like here at Unity of Yucaipa, an actual circle of belonging, where there is a commitment and an intention to be in sacred relationship. Now, we all have different views. Oh yeah, every political view is here, even different religious views are here, right? We all have different views on the right way to eat, like vegans, carnivores, vegetarians, raw food, right? But see, whether it's food, politics, or religion, these are all just experiences we're having. When our soul gets ready to lay down this body, it doesn't go into pure source energy again thinking about politics or religion or food. It's just connected into the circle of belonging, right? We don't take a way of eating or voting or worshiping with us. We don't. Those things are all changeable. Eating, voting, worshiping. Some of us have changed our minds, have been on this planet long enough to change our mind quite a few times about those, right? A true circle of belonging is there for us when we change our mind. Now, in a sacred relationship, we're accepting each other. And we don't have to control. We know we don't have to control how others eat, vote, or worship because we have faith in what works within us, through us, for us, as us. And we have faith in what works in others, through them, for them, as them. This is their journey. We're here to support them, not tell them what we think they should be doing. That would imply we're not trusting what works through them. And if we're not trusting what works through them, we're not trusting what works through us. How they eat, vote, worship, that's their journey. If we ever have a need to control, unless they're a little kid who needs us to pick out a healthy diet for them, I'm talking adult relationships here. If we feel a need to control them, like we have to get them to change their mind to be in agreement with us, that's not our soul talking. It's not coming from here. It's this guy right there, listening to the adversary who just wants to stir stuff up. Now, the shelter of belonging, it offers us communion with the God force, our sacred relationships. They're teaching us to trust what works not just through us, but through others. And in community, this is how we experience ourself in a greater way. That we let others have their beliefs. We just trust their God self. We accept them where they are and we love them. The crucial essence of what they are is not changed by how they eat, vote, or worship. Just like the crucial essence of who you are does not change by how you eat, vote, or worship. John O'Donohue says, perhaps community is a constellation. Each one of us is a different light in the emerging collective brightness. A constellation of light has greater power of illumination than any single light would have on its own. We are here for each other. We belong to each other. And there is something that brought us here together and gave us to each other at this time. So we practice the art of being in a sacred community and that circle of belonging, understanding then that something greater is being created through us as a constellation. In the circle of belonging, we are creating a wave that lifts all of the boats. We create a wave that lifts all the boats so we all rise together. We all rise together. And this is how we create heaven on earth. So until next time, remember, you are the activity of spirit and body. You are the heart and hands of soul in this world, of spirit in this world. You are a soul designed for growth and goodness. You are a soul designed to do all of this stuff. Not just survive, but thrive here. In everything you do, you are blessed. And so it is.